called Ask a Christian Counselor, and I've been doing it for the last 8 years. And usually it's about once a month, but um, usually we focus on things around spirituality, mental health, counseling, spirituality, faith, anything that has to do with the intersection of those topics. And today I'm going to be talking about mental health and spirituality, especially during the time of the pandemic. And I'm just going to be recording it at the same time. So, but hopefully you won't notice too much of a difference. So, this will be edited later. But this is obviously a very relevant topic. This is actually based on a sermon that I just recently preached at my church, and also wanted to share it on the podcast and on Facebook and YouTube. So, where you'll see me looking at different cameras because they're all going at the same time. So hopefully this is of help to you. I've been seeing a lot of people struggling emotionally during this time. Obviously we know 2020 has been a very difficult year. So, so I just wanted to provide some insight. So usually I just start the podcast by saying, hi, my name is Tress, and welcome to the show. Well, today we're going to be talking about mental health, spirituality, especially as it relates to the pandemic. So there was a pretty interesting, but pretty kind of honestly very shocking, at least to me, survey that came out. The Commonwealth Fund joined the survey research firm SSRS to interview 8,259 adults aged 18 and older between March and May of 2020. And what they found was 1/3 of U.S. adults reported experiencing stress, anxiety, and great sadness that was difficult to cope with by themselves, a significantly higher proportion than in other countries. Only about 1 in 3 U.S. adults were able to get help from a professional to deal with these feelings. Over 30% of Americans face negative economic impacts due to the pandemic, significantly more than in the comparison countries. 30%, and it's possible that it's higher than that, but that's 1 in 3 people are experiencing stress, anxiety, and even depression. And obviously, I think we know why, but at the same time, what do we do? And a lot of this anxiety can compound upon itself and actually make it worse. Anxiety also spreads like a virus, fear and anxiety. And we know all about how viruses are spread. We've learned a lot about that this year, but we also have to recognize the other virus, which is fear and anxiety. And so the question I kind of want to tackle here, at least just on this specific show, is okay, what can we do, especially if we are feeling anxious or fearful or even depressed? There was also another article published last month in Counseling Today. Stephanie Burns, an associate psychology education professor and coordinator of the clinical mental health counseling program at Western Michigan University, says that 2 things were happening at once for clients coming into therapy. They were going through their own already existing struggles of depression they were already going through their own already existing struggles of depression and anxiety. Then there's the trauma from what this crisis brought. Trauma is really about anything providing discomfort or distress to where an individual feels overwhelmed. It's not something as obvious as getting hit by a car. Consciously, you can think some of this doesn't bother you, but in the subconscious mind, trauma can exist. Everyone lost something from COVID. People lost jobs, loved ones, by and large, also their daily lives. And that's true. Everything has changed. And, we talk about it every day, like, oh, this is, a terrible year, or things are different this time around. But at the same time, this emotional impact is very, very real. And this analogy of anxiety also being like a virus actually comes from Edwin Friedman. He was a rabbi and a pastoral counselor. And very often in unhealthy communities, because he's specifically talking about churches and faith communities, but this applies to any community. Often, anxiety will spread like a virus, and in unhealthy communities, this anxiety spreads to everyone. Everyone's infected by the fear and the anxiety. And if we are not taking care of ourselves, we can be like diseased cells that spread it to other people. But what does it mean to be healthy? Well, to be an emotionally healthy person means that we are more like the immune system. We're more like a white blood cell that absorbs that anxiety. And that's something that is possible. If somebody's emotionally healthy, then they're able to calm down their own anxiety and also be a source of strength for other people. Now, of course, nobody gets to this point where they are emotionally healthy and everything's set, right? We know this also from just what it means to grow as a Christian. You know, nobody's ever at a static state where they don't need to grow anymore. It's always a continual thing. And so, not just emotional health, but just health, period, is always a direction that we're going toward. No one ever gets to a place of never having any problems anymore. So, when we talk about emotionally healthy, and if you're struggling with anxiety or depression, as I have as well, that's fine. But the healthy thing is to take care of yourself and to make sure that you're implementing different types of self-care as you are depending on other people and taking care of yourself. And I'll give you some more specific examples of what this can look like. So we don't want to be like diseased cells. We want to be like those white blood cells. But at the same time, we have to take care of our own anxiety. And I don't think people realize just how impactful this year has been. Because just like the therapist I don't want to say her, Stephanie Burns, what she said was very similar to what I see in pastoral counseling is people will be coming in and they'll be like, okay, this is not a big deal, but like I'm extremely freaked out. And I have to remind them, take into consideration, this year has been very traumatic for people. And what's something that might have been like a 3 out of 10, on the anxiety scale, it's so much worse now. It's kind of bumped up whatever problem that you might be experiencing. And, maybe you're having an issue in your relationship or a problem at work. That's now elevated because of the anxiety around everything that's going on. And it's not just the pandemic. It's also an election year. And I don't talk about politics on here. And I don't care what party you are. It's extremely stressful watching the news. And we have to be aware that our culture is not really suited for calming our anxiety. It's everywhere. And there are people that are making money off of your insecurity. It's true. And I think we know this is true, but sometimes we have to take a step back and second guess a lot of the messages that we're getting from commercials, from TV shows, from the news. Because there's money to be made when people are afraid. And so we're not going to find our answers out there. So, what are some healthy ways of supporting ourselves? Well, I came up with a list of several different things. And pretty much in a nutshell, it's filter out the bad, filter in the good, and connection. So find connection, filter out the bad, filter in the good. So let's start out with like filtering out the bad. What does that mean? So one thing, turn off the news. Now, it's one thing to be informed. We want to be informed. I understand that. But, 20 years ago, we didn't have constant 24 hours news breaks that would just interrupt our day, like constantly. And now we have notifications on our phone for every news story we're alerted to. And obviously, it's been a very eventful year. Like, I get that. But at the very beginning of the pandemic, I found myself constantly refreshing the news, just, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And it was not calming me down. It was making me feel more anxious. And so, I tell clients, like, limit your intake of news because, again, a lot of these sources of news, and they provide a lot of, information for us, but a lot of these sources, there's you got to follow the money. Like they want you to keep watching, they want you to be addicted, and so just limit your intake. Whether it's just maybe just scanning the headlines for just major updates, maybe once, maybe twice in the evening. That's it. But just constantly watching, just watch and see how it's affecting your anxiety. You also have to fight for your schedule. You have to have downtime. So you got to turn off distractions. And because a lot of people are working at home now, it is very hard to separate work from personal life, and that's a really big challenge. And I understand, again, it's a weird year where a lot of weird stuff is happening, but we still have to be intentional about having those boundaries in our lives so that we're not overwhelmed. So fight for your schedule. If you have to schedule a cutoff time, like I'm not going to answer any more emails or any more texts that have to do with work after 7 p.m., after 8 p.m., you got to have some downtime because then it starts to interfere with your sleep, which can totally throw off everything. And then also just recognizing that for downtime, we're not just talking about just vegging in front of the TV or just playing video games or just being on your phone, which is fine on occasion. Like there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but we want also more nurturing activities as well, things that will feed the soul. And I'll talk more about that in just a couple minutes, but we need downtime to rest, and you really do probably need downtime before you go to bed too, because it's going to help you kind of slip into sleep a lot easier if you're able to do that. But again, you're going to have to fight for it. Like everything, and I tell this to couples and individuals, that are stressed out, like you're going to have to fight for it because nobody else is going to. Nobody is. You got to protect your peace, and nobody's going to do it for you. Everybody needs something from you, whether it's family members, kids, your boss, employees. I don't care who it is. The only one who's gonna be fighting for you is you. Filter in the good. So obviously, see a counselor if you're struggling emotionally, if you're anxious, if you're overwhelmed, if you're feeling depressed, especially, you need to get professional help. And nothing is wrong with that. In fact, that's usually a very good sign that somebody is doing the right thing. It's a sign of emotional health that you're getting help. And that's what I always try to remind people because, we still have a stigma around mental health. We still have a stigma around the idea that people go to counseling. It's less than it used to be, but it's still there. And so sometimes people will apologize, when they come to, even just pastoral counseling, like, oh, I should have this figured out, or I'm sorry to waste your time. And it's like, no, this is what I do. And this is actually a good sign that you're doing the right thing. So, see a counselor, somebody who specializes in what you're struggling with. And I know it's also emotionally draining to find a counselor. But, start off with just seeing what benefits you have available already, whether it's through your insurance company or your work might have what's known as an EAP program, which is not an emotionally, it's an employee assistance program, and they essentially have services for their employees that they've contracted with other companies who contract with therapists, and it's essentially free counseling. You might have a copay, but for the most part, it's covered at least for the first few sessions. So, but you'll want to talk to your HR department. So that's always an option as well. And, there's more online counseling services, whether it's with local therapists or some of these other ones out there called like BetterHealth or Faithful Counseling is the one that sponsors our podcast, but they have licensed online Christian counselors. So just see what resources are available to you. So filtering in the good. We've talked about filtering out the bad. We're talking about filtering in the good. We've talked about seeing a counselor. Also, nurturing activities. I mentioned that before. What do we mean by nurturing activities? These are things that are beyond just vegging in front of the TV. Things like hobbies, crafts, music, anything creative that will get the right brain really kind of firing. And time flies when you're having fun. And a lot of times as adults, we forget to have fun. We forget to take breaks and to play, just the same way that children play. You're really getting in touch with your inner child. And you have to, again, you have to carve this into your schedule because work will easily impede on your personal time. Also, sleep, diet, and exercise. And we know this. Your doctor probably reminds you, but we have to hear it all the time because we very easily let work take over these things. Make sure that you're getting enough sleep. Make sure that you're eating a healthy diet. Now, I'm not talking about going on a diet, unless your doctor has put you on one. But we're not talking about extreme diets. We're just talking about nutrition, making sure that you're getting, what you need from healthy food sources and not from junk food or from processed food. And then exercise. And even if you're not somebody who exercises, like just something as simple as going to take a walk can go a long way, and it'll help you sleep better too. So health is very similar to a garden. You need all these different ingredients, and when something is off, or you're not getting enough sunlight or fertilizer or time, then your health will suffer. And this applies also to one's spiritual life as well. But the spiritual and the physical life of a person are very much intertwined. Also, connection. Connect with other people. Spend time with loved ones, with family, with friends. And I know there's obviously this social distancing that we have to do. So even if it's a phone call or a video call, obviously it's not the same thing as being in person. But at the same time, it's still better than nothing. And we need connection. A lot of times when people are feeling anxious, they're not talking. And very, very often, anxiety is a sign that we need to connect with somebody. And so that's a good thing. That's a survival mechanism that's been put in us. So you want to connect with other people. And often you might have to make the first step. I think a lot of times we tell ourselves, okay, well, I need to find friends, or, nobody's asked me to hang out. And often a lot of other people are thinking the same thing. And so I encourage people, make the first step. You may not find friends, you may have to make friends. Kids are really good at doing this. They just, if you have kids, or if you just remember being a kid, like you just see another kid and you're like, hey, let's play. And obviously it's a little bit more awkward when you're an adult, but sometimes you have to make the first step. So we are communal people. We all need help. I like this quote by Robert Brault. He says, most of us don't need a psychiatric therapist as much as a friend to be silly with. And I love that. And then also when we're talking about connection, if you're a person of faith, connect with God. God promises to provide for us our basic necessities. And I'm not talking about, God's going to make you rich. I'm not talking about the prosperity gospel. Just talking about the fact that God has told us, and I'm looking at Matthew 6:25 through 34 specifically, where Jesus says that the Lord will provide for our most basic needs. And so I know a lot of people are going through a lot of financial strain. Sometimes we have to remember, okay, God is the ultimate provider, and I trust in him. Also, things such as spiritual disciplines, these are ways that you can connect with God through things like prayer, meditation, reflection, and journaling. Journaling can be a powerful way to find connection with God and with yourself as well in the process. Just writing your thoughts out. And there's some research that shows that journaling can be very helpful to people's mental health, especially if they are processing very emotionally difficult things. So, when I mentioned prayer, a lot of people, when we think of prayer, we think of, that prayer is primarily about asking God for things or asking him to change things. What I've found is that it strengthens me, it changes me, it centers me, it helps me focus on what's really important, to let go of things that aren't important, and ultimately connects me to the source of all wisdom so that I can make the right choices. And so prayer is not so much about changing your circumstances as much as changing you. And also, God does not guarantee against bad things happening, but he will help us through it. He has not promised to save us from suffering. That's not a biblical concept. I like this quote by Larry Crabb. He's a Christian psychologist. He says, "Beneath the surface of everyone's life, especially the more mature, is an ache that will not go away. It can be ignored, disguised, mislabeled, or submerged by a torrent of activity, but it will not disappear, and for good reason. We were designed to enjoy a better world than this, and until that better world comes along, we will groan for what we do not have. An aching soul is evidence not of neurosis or spiritual immaturity, but of realism." So I encourage my clients to have a realistic but redemptive perspective. Positive thinking, yes, but one that is grounded in reality, that does not ignore suffering or ignore negative or unpleasant emotions, one that takes into consideration all of those things, but has a redemptive edge toward it, one that is focused on the good that can come out of it, but also, again, I'm not talking about this toxic type of positivity that often we see online, where people think, or they'll say things like, don't think negatively, or oh, the person's in heaven now, and it's not very comforting. It's okay to be sad. Sadness is a very human and normal emotion. There's nothing wrong with it. It may be unpleasant, but it's incredibly important for us to feel that feeling, especially if we are dealing with deep sorrow or we're losing someone, because sorrow is also a expression of love, not just joy. We like joy. Joy feels good, but sorrow is also really important as well. So anyway, we talked about mental health and the toll that this pandemic has had, and also how we can take care of ourselves through self-care, filtering out the bad, filtering in the good, connecting with other people, and connecting with God. So those are just some thoughts that I have for you. At the end of my podcast, I always remind my audience, I want to remind each and every one of you that you are made in the image of God, and He loves you unconditionally. Walk in this knowledge and get support when you forget. God bless. Thank you for joining me.